Good evening. Can you hear me okay? Okay. Welcome to Woke 101 is Marxism in America. Pretty awesome to see you guys here. This is a sold-out event. Thank you to Hotel Arista, this amazing hotel, and their wonderful staff. We're really appreciative of you guys, so thank you. So tonight's event was really inspired by our recognition. Why are you standing back? Come up here. Come up here. So this was inspired by our recognition that we really need to get back to basics on how to have courageous conversations. So I think it's fair that many of you here can probably recognize many of our peers don't really know how we've arrived to this point, whether it be culturally or politically. So I heard earlier this year a parent ask a question of another parent at one of my daughter's activities: what is woke? And if there was a record that could have screeched, I would have been, what? And he was legitimately asking. He has 4 young children, and the woman who he was talking to must have recognized my computer. I'm sometimes on the laptop with Moms for Liberty, Awake Illinois, Christian School, and she looked at me over her glasses like, you want to take this one? And I turned to him and said, well, I'd love to talk to you about that. And what's really cool is that has evolved into multiple conversations on issues affecting our children. Just that one question. So that was really our wake-up call. We have to get back to basics and be able to educate one another and just talk about the things that we're seeing. So Woke 101 was born. I think it's akin to, and I was talking to a few of you about this earlier, it's as if we've all watched the movie and you kind of see your friends are starting to see the previews for it. And so this type of effort of getting back to basics is really an invitation into the theater. Make sense? All right. So we recognize as patriots, as lovers of this country, that to love America, you do not have to be stiff or uptight. I mean, right now we're in a time where if you love America, we need to be a little bit more rock and roll. And if you look at thank you. And if you look at the advocacy of these fine people here with me, that's really been the vibe prior to officially launching Awake Americans, was we're unapologetic, we've been bold, and we've actually been a lot of fun. So time to do some rock and roll.
We are a lot of fun.
We're a lot of fun. And we can't be canceled. We cannot be canceled. Especially, neither can you, Especially Steve, because he's a 5th-generation cattle rancher and father of 3 and 17-year school board member. Nobody cancels a cattle rancher, right? It's like Yellowstone right here. Helen Levinson, another director with Awake Americans, she cannot be canceled. She's the daughter of 2 Christian Arab immigrants from Jordan. She was raised in Chicago. And she spoke out against CRT, against race-based curricula of a teacher in her district, and she was sued. She was sued for writing a letter of that concern, and guess what? She won the suit. And thanks to America First Legal for pro bono representing you in that. That was awesome. Scarlett Johnson, director with Awake Americans, she cannot be canceled. She's a Puerto Rican mama bear of 5 in Wisconsin who is unapologetic in defending children. She has, 43,000 followers on Twitter and growing, including a follower by the name of Dr. Jordan Peterson. Yes. She's saying good things. I'm just a mom. I know many of you. I have 3 children. My husband, John, is here. I just speak truth and defend children. And I don't care if our awful governor or leftists or Marxists or communists or insert enemy here hates that. So we cannot We cannot be canceled. There you go. So thank you. So that's a little bit about us, but we'll talk to any of you anytime. So to kick off this program, we want to talk to you guys about some founding father inspiration. So how many of you know the first signature on the Declaration of Independence? It's known as the John Hancock. You're going to put your John Hancock there, right? So he was the first one to sign this declaration, and it was a stunning example of courage. Look how beautiful his handwriting is there. And there he is. So he was signaling the most powerful country at the time, England, that he took part in this treasonous document. But interestingly, one of the first copies of the Declaration of Independence was known as the Dunlap Broadside. It only had Hancock's signature on it, and that of witness Charles Thompson, secretary. Broadside, for anybody who's not familiar, that was the name of a flyer, a single sheet of paper, basically just a flyer. John Dunlap, was the name of the young 29-year-old Philadelphia printer. He was an Irishman. He had a shop, and it was tasked with typesetting this version. It was likely done in a hurry and overnight, given it had some errors, it had some backward watermarks, folds. So on that night of July 4th, 1776, it's suspected that 200 copies were printed that became known as the Dunlap broadside. According to Ted Widmer, author of Ark of the Liberties, America and the World, it is romantic to think that Ben Franklin, the greatest printer of his day, was there in Dunlap's shop, along with Jefferson, the nervous author, close at hand. John Adams later wrote, "We were all in haste." Can you imagine? They were tasked with getting these out to the new United States in a hurry. The Dunlap broadsides were sent all throughout the United States, including to the commander-in-chief of the Continental Army, George Washington, who directed that it be read to the troops on July 9th. Another copy was sent to England. The Continental Congress did not send any copies to King George III until later that year, because it might have been awkward. So, as they went on through the summer, eventually on August 2nd, the Founding Fathers signed the copy that we all know today. And with each graceful stroke of that pen, you can imagine how symbolic that was for each of them. But John Hancock made a big and beautiful, bold mark, not knowing how and if he would be attacked, or as we say today, canceled, right? Hancock was a little bit rock and roll, wasn't he? They all were, including Dunlap, who actually went on to become the official printer to Congress in 1778. So just a little bit of Founding Father inspiration for us. And I'd like to welcome you over here. Yeah, my heel is stuck in the stage. Yeah, there we go. Okay.
Hi, everyone. Our vision as advocates and a nonprofit organization is that together we can make our own bold and beautiful mark with courageous conversations. So as we gather together in real time, good things happen. It's why our haters work so hard to try to cancel our events, bless their hearts, try as they might to harass and tell lies about us. Just look at our social media. They're obsessed. They smear who they fear, but we can't be canceled.
We'd like to say thank you to all of our sponsors and donors for supporting our growing mission, especially Dr. James Economus, Dave and Lynn Ulrich, and Foundation for the Restoration of America. Thank you so much. The Foundation for the Restoration. We couldn't do this without you. The Foundation for the Restoration of America just launched a new and exciting scholarship program for students aged 16 and above. The deadline for the first round of scholarships is June 30th, where $50,000 will be awarded to students. It may be put towards high school or college or institution or trade school. Okay. Or a trade school. A prerequisite is to complete 9 hours of the Hinsdale College's online civic courses. So please share the scholarship opportunity with your networks. You can visit www.ffroa.com, and anyone can take the Hinsdale courses for free at hinsdale.edu. If you have any questions about this, feel free to see us afterwards and we'll share this information with you. Thank you.
Special thanks also to our spouses and families for supporting our advocacy efforts over these past few years. I want to point out my lovely wife, Jennifer, right over there in the corner. She's been with me through all this. We've been married for 30 years. She's been a teacher for over 20 years, and I've just been blessed to have her by my side, whether it be on the farm and ranch or through all this stuff. None of us could do this without their support. Through our advocacy work, we have met far more awesome people than cringy ones. Really, that's true. All of you people I meet at different times, I mean, just really good people who call me and message me and just thank us for what we do, and we appreciate it. Rock stars of advocacy that are paving the 21st century enlightenment that cannot be canceled. We are humbled tonight's rock star speakers accepted our invitation to share their intellect and wisdom. These three amazing Americans are in their own individual ways disrupting tyranny, standing for American principles, and activating everyday Americans into advocacy. Thanks to our sponsors and supporters, we at Awake Americans are excited to share this evening with you all. So to empower us in this moment of time, are we ready to take the dive into Woke 101? Is Marxism in America? And that's what we're going to discuss tonight.
I'm going to get the slides back up while you introduce our speaker. Right.
So our first speaker is an amazing woman. She's a mother of 6. She's stood up for things when times were tough, and we've seen a lot of people do that. And I just want to give a huge shout out tonight to moms. I mean, that's kind of why I got started. Shannon and I got connected, and she's just a mom that was like fed up with all this stuff. And we've seen over the last 3 years, moms standing up. And I always challenge men, and I will continue to do that tonight. We need men to stand up with these moms because men and males are being destroyed in this country right and left. So we need men to stand up with these lovely moms alongside of them so we can get some things taken care of. Noelle Mering is a fellow at the Ethics and Policy Center. She is the author of the book Awake, Not Woke. She's going to have some copies for that tonight if you want some. A Christian Response to the Cult of Progressive Ideology, co-author of the Theology of Home book series, and an editor for the website theologyofhome.com. So with no further ado, I would like Noelle to come up, and here we go.
Thanks, Steve. Hi, everyone. I'm so glad to be here with you tonight. I'm so grateful for Shannon, her husband John, who welcomed us to this event, to their home last night, to the full team, Helen, Steve, to Scarlett, and also especially to my co-speakers, James and Siobhan, whose work I have benefited from greatly and indebted to both of them. I love the theme of maybe bringing a little rock starness into the conservative movement. I speak on the woke movement all around the country, and one of the things that I found that I think is consistent is my mic being picked up? Are we good on sound? Is that there's a dynamism, I think, to this sort of event that is certainly not present at a woke event. And I think there's a really good reason for that, which is there's real freedom in not having to fear what you're going to say and what someone's going to say to you. And I think when you're controlled by an ideology, you have to have such narrative control because it's a negation of reality. And so if you're negating reality, then you're going to have to constantly be reframing things in order to be consistent with the party line. And so you're going to be afraid. You're going to be censorious. You're going to be silencing. And there's not a freedom there. There's not a dynamism. So I'm coming to you tonight to speak about, as a writer, as someone who studied philosophy, but primarily I'm coming to you to speak, as Steve said, as a mom. I've spent half my life, about 24 years, being pregnant, nursing babies, raising children, trying to figure out how to form them into the world, to have them impart in them a life that is meaningful, accepting responsibility, striving after virtue. And there's a real connection in those things on how to have an actual happy life, right? Taking responsibility and striving for virtue. And I think those two things are particularly targeted. There's a reason why Jordan Peterson has made a $1 billion career telling people to accept responsibility, right? I mean, there's a whole host of reasons why he's successful, because he's amazing, but that is a core message of his. There's a reason why Viktor Frankl wrote a book called Man's Search for Meaning. That meaning and responsibility are so integral to how you have a life that feels purposeful and feels like it's got direction, that it's rooted and is pointing towards something. And oftentimes those things are given to you through the institutions that are very deeply and primordially human, the family and the faith. And I've spent the other part of my life, not the other part, but a lot of my life, trying to not only do family life well, but also to understand what it means to be a Christian in the world. And so I'm going to incorporate some of that into my talk, not because I think that in order to fight the woke movement, you have to have a particular confessional faith, and I'm not a Christian nationalist by any means, but it is my experience, and it is also the two of the things that Karl Marx identified as the twin obstacles to revolution: the family and the faith and private property. But I'm not going to speak about that. I want to start by talking about a particular movie that I love. It came out in 1999. It was by a director named M. Night Shyamalan, and it's called The Sixth Sense. Has anyone seen that movie? There's a particular scene in it that's always stuck with me where Haley Joel Osment, he's a child, he plays a boy named Cole who can see dead people, and he sees a young girl his age who has passed away, and it's at her wake. And she comes to him from the next life and gives him a videotape. We're all old enough to remember what videotapes are. When I talk to college students, I have to kind of tell them what that is. They're like, wow, look at this crazy old lady telling me about this weird, thick thing you had to put into a machine. Anyway, she gives him a videotape and says, can you please play this for my father? And so he goes to her wake, unsure what he's doing, and crosses the room and gives it to this man, intense and wild with grief, and says, please watch this. The father puts it in the screen and the TV and watches with horror as he sees that his daughter, who had died, had secretly videotaped his wife, her mother, poisoning her food before she would bring it to her daughter. And from this scene, many of us were introduced to a very disturbing mental health condition called Munchausen syndrome by proxy. And I wrote about it in 2020 in my book, and I referenced it, or compared it to what I would say is Marxism syndrome by proxy. I thought it was quite clever at the time. It turns out now a lot of people are calling it that. And there's a good reason for that too, particularly feels on the nose with the transgender movement, right? Most of the people who are facilitating transitions are the moms. Where are the dads, right? Most of the people who are bringing kids to drag shows now are moms, woke moms. Where are the dads? Did we stop remembering that fathers exist? So I think it's very on the nose in that comparison. But I think in broader ways, we can think about Munchausen syndrome by proxy as being analogous to what we're experiencing now. For one thing, the process of becoming woke is a process of telling people, raising their consciousness to the reality that they might think that they're happy, they might think that they can live a fine life, but that they are actually need to become aware of the abject misery that is the core of not only their life, but every interaction, every institution, your neighbor's barbecue, your future marriage, your school, your church. Everything has a pervasive element of illness to it. It's an illusion that you think you can be happy. You might be hated because of your skin color. You might think that you can succeed in life. You actually can't. And in fact, not only can you not, but there are systemic powers beyond your control that are going to push you down and keep you from succeeding. Try telling that to any person and thinking that that is going to be a hopeful message. Or maybe you were born in the wrong body. You're sick. You need to be cured. Perhaps we need to halt your puberty. Perhaps we need to mutilate your genitals. Or maybe your sickness is that you're privileged and that you are complicit in, without your knowing, an omnipresent, omnipowerful, systemic force that you need an omniscient and all-knowing secret knowledge, woke shepherd, to shepherd you through how to navigate it so that you can self-incriminate for the rest of your life. So I think that for all these reasons, there is a Marxism that is very much like this mental illness. And there are three characters in the scene that I think can be instructive also for us to understand that we cannot have a blanket approach in how we deal with people who are compelled by this ideology. The daughter is a pure victim, right? She was given the poison. She had no complicity in it, nor any culpability. And she is a true victim of this movement. And she needs to be helped. She needs to be healed. There's also the father, who had no complicity either. He is ignorant of the lie that's at the core of the illness. that his wife, who, usually it's a caretaker who has got this illness and will invent a disease and exaggerate the symptoms and then eventually become the cause of the disease in the person for whom she cares. And he would have done anything to know the poison that he was bringing under the guise of trying to help, right, the person that he loved the most. He needs to be enlightened. He needs to be awakened. And then there's the mother, and she just needs to be stopped. And the reason why we need to have these distinctions is that we can fall into two errors, where we can think that someone who is a victim of this movement is actually our enemy and look at them as such. The other error is we can look at someone who is a sinister actor harming deeply human beings and think, in a sort of bout of misplaced Christian compassion, that this is someone to have compassion towards, to befriend, to try to heal. Maybe at some point that sort of thing can happen, but they just need to be stopped. And so I think we need to know that there are distinctions there. So what is the poison? You become woke by becoming ideologically possessed. Jordan Peterson uses that phrase a lot, and I think it's a good one, because the goal of the woke movement has for a long time been institutional power, right? You've probably heard the phrase, the long march through the institutions, through the courts, the academy, through K through 12, through churches, through seminaries, through media, through Hollywood, through journalism, through politics. But the end goal was not the capture of those institutions. The end goal is the capture of the hidden life, the interior of life of every person in this room and beyond, right? It's a long march through the institutions in order to capture the interior human soul. So to become woke is to capture that interior life of the human person, convincing people that they might be as gods. The first fake news, in the Garden of Eden, you might be as gods. So that they might become enslaved, right? The promise of becoming a god is always first bait and switch. It's sold as empowerment. It ends up like that Bob Dylan song, you will wind up looking through a keyhole down upon your knees. Enslaved first to your will and then to the will of the state, eventually. Control of your exterior life so that they might control your interior life. So it's to adopt a worldview that sees all the world, every institution, and every interaction as plagued by two particular evils: societal oppression and sexual repression. But getting woke is not just to become aware of these things, it's to become an activist with a mission to unmask the oppression and repression around you and in you as a means of destabilizing the institutions and getting other people to become woke to oppression and repression around them as well. So I want to talk about those two evils and the freedom from them, according to the woke, and then some things we can do in response. So the first evil, societal oppression. This is getting people to adopt a collectivist worldview, identity politics, right? It's a reformulation of Marxism's old oppressor-oppressed class idea, but as many people realized quickly after the revolution did not come to pass, the distinctions had to be broadened beyond the category of class into categories of identity. So think about how we have defined ourselves traditionally. So, in philosophy, if you read Aristotle, a human being is a rational animal. We're distinct from the beasts in the ability to reason. If you are in a Judeo-Christian religion, you might believe that we are defined by our being made in the image and likeness of God, that we are defined in relationship to God, to love himself. For the woke movement, we are not defined in ways that unite us, but rather in ways that divide us. We're not defined by the love of God, but rather by the hatred of mankind. And this gives us a contra-gospel mission. So if we are defined by the love of God, we have a good news message to spread. We need to go around, tell other people, you too are defined by the love of God. You're made by him, for him. If we are defined by the hatred of society, we have a contra-gospel mission, right? We need to go out to other people and spread the bad news, not that they are loved, but rather that they are hated. They might not be aware of that, and that becomes our apostolate of misery, right? We become apostles of misery. So in other words, as central to who you are is where you sit on the lines of oppression. This is one of the reasons why a conservative black man will be deplatformed, right? A conservative woman will not be on the cover of a magazine as a strong, empowered voice for womanhood. I'm not going to see Shannon on the cover of Time magazine anytime soon, nor will anyone see me. Because we don't represent womanhood in the way that womanhood has been redefined. Whereas to be a woman is not to be a woman in the obvious ways. To be a woman is to be fighting the core oppression that is at the core of your humanity. So you have to be a politicized woman. You have to be a politicized person in order to be empowered. In other words, it's not the members of the oppressed class that are being empowered, it's the ideology itself. All right. Now, of course, anyone can become tribalistic, fractured, divisive. Anyone can define things in negative ways. The difference is that defining your identity by universals is a corrective for that tribalistic tendency. For the woke, the division, that tribalism is a feature. It's not a bug. It's not an accident. It's actually a feature. Every revolutionary from Marx to Marcuse knew that a revolution does not come from a harmonious society of people who are getting along and see each other with mercy and love and harmony. Rather, it comes from an enraged society. And so you have to rub raw the sores of discontent. And so any sort of unifying identity definition has to be attacked. And the woke has been extremely successful at rebranding unifying institutions, the family, patriotism, the faith. Think about the family how it's been portrayed in movie after movie as something oppressive, the domineering father, the underutilized mother, the children who are nothing but pains, the desire to break free of the bourgeois life of family. Think about how the United States has been rebranded. If you see someone flying the American flag, oftentimes what most people assume is that they are, a redneck, or that they have some racism, they're a white supremacist, they're a crazy Trump person, whatever stereotype someone might come up with. Meanwhile, we have started flying across our embassies all over the world. Another flag, the pride flag, the trans flag, proclaiming our new creedal dogmas to other countries. This is a sign of a regime change. Flag is a symbol for a very particular reason. When the United States starts coloring the American flag as something negative, oppressive, and then elevating a flag that's built around pelvic creeds, there has been a regime change. You can be sure of that. So part of this first, this societal oppression is that it creates a desire and a perverse incentive to identify yourself as a victim, to locate your moral stature in ways in which you can claim a position of oppression. And you can think about this as the way we talk. When you get in arguments with someone, oftentimes they'll say, well, I could say in an argument, I'm a daughter of an Asian immigrant, which I am. Someone could say, as a woman in talking to a man. I had an old friend from high school who on Facebook, when the Dobbs decision was leaked, you go to Facebook to argue with your old high school friends. I think that's the purpose of Facebook. And he said, gentlemen, take a seat. Let's let the people with uteruses fight this, speak about this one. We have no business talking about this. And so I said, okay, here we go. And I just commented, I said, as a woman, as a person with a uterus, then you'll have to defer to me when I say that a human being has a right to not be killed from conception till natural death. And he did not defer to me. I am shocked to say he did not defer to me at all. Anyway, but this idea that I'm going to argue from my identity, for one thing, it's a fallacy, right? But it speaks to the idea that truth is no longer the desired goal. This is the difference between critical thinking to critical theory. Critical thinking invites objections because if your goal is truth, you want to course correct if you're off, you want to strengthen your argument, and you want to pursue what is right. If your goal is critical theory, your goal is not truth, it is power. And so that creates a very different method of arguing, meaning you don't invite objections, you want to silence them. Because you're not interested in course correcting. You're interested not in dialogue, but you're interested in dominating. Okay. So with the collectivized identity, we want to become a victim. In order to maintain a status of perpetual victimhood, I have to become a perpetual accuser. And this is where you get a society roiling with conflict, because there is no victimhood without someone to accuse. And by becoming a perpetual accuser, this spreads the victim psychology so quickly and so wildly, because it creates people who are desperate to unmask the evil in others and bereft of the ability to examine themselves, which is the first step towards virtue, right? So the celebration of the victim paradoxically leads to the utter rejection of humility, for it's only through self-examination that humility can even hope to be attained. Victim psychology also corrodes the ability to discern what is true. A politicized soul is too addicted to the satisfaction of his enemies being wrong than to admit of any error on his own part. In that environment, even very obvious lies can take hold and thrive. The second evil is the evil of sexual repression. The way to become freed and liberated from this evil is through transgression, adopting a transgressive identity. So while the first evil identifies the oppression outside of ourselves, the second one identifies our own internalized desire to repress our authentic selves, and to the need to be liberated from the moral law. The sexual revolution was a key tenet of the Cultural Revolution. There's a reason why revolution is part of the sexual revolution. It was actually started by a neo-Marxist named Wilhelm Reich, wrote a book called Sexual Revolution. And he had a very disturbing life. But anyway, I get into that in my book, but I won't do it now. So like social oppression, the woke understanding of sexual repression involves a radical redefinition of the human person, that the human person has no stable nature. This is consistent with every totalitarian regime, that in order to re-engineer society, you have to believe that the human being is eminently malleable. And this maintains that our purpose for existence is expression, to identify the unique desires that I can identify within myself, to live them out and to express them out into the world. And the greater, more transgressive that expression takes hold, then the more opportunity for liberation I can have, because the greater defiance it takes of any sort of societal taboo or constructed moral law, constructed according to the movement. So transgressing moral laws becomes a revolutionary act, albeit one that is sometimes met with internal resistance. There were some 60s revolutionaries in the Weather Underground who testified to having felt real shame that they were not able to overcome their internal instincts and natural instincts towards heterosexuality, that they thought, surely this is a bourgeois problem within me and would be far more revolutionary if I were able to be free of this and engage in, intimate acts with every single gender, all 25 of them. A contemporary manifestation of this might be when, now there's a movement where transgender people will say, if a man identifies as a woman and then a straight man rejects him as for a candidate for intimacy, that man is a bigot because he now is a woman. And so every straight man, it becomes almost a right, that you need to accept me as a sexual partner. This idea of overriding your human nature is intrinsic and crucial to the revolution. This creates a limitless potential for transgression. Like the insatiable nature for sin, what is transgressive today becomes boringly normal tomorrow, and so it has to be queered. And then so on and so on and so on. Every transgressive act will become stable pretty soon, and you have to keep pushing the envelope until you've arrived at a place that you never thought you would arrive. And I think that this is where we see, things moving in the movement to normalize younger and younger ages of sexual encounters with children, and so on and so forth. That there is something in their innocence that becomes a real particular desire for the transgressive self. There's a phrase that James actually has said or written several times called innocence is dominance. And that rocked my world actually when I first read that, because it's so true. That when the transgender story hours first started happening, one of the reasons given was that this is an anti-bullying effort. We need to expose children to alternative lifestyles so that they won't bully kids who are prone this way. Second reason, there might be a child who is prone to this lifestyle, and we need to give them a path and to see how they can live it out. But the deeper reason is that the child's discomfort seeing grown men twerking in a miniskirt and heels in front of them, they're giggling, they're looking away, they're not knowing how to handle it, that in itself is perpetuating a dominance in society that is an obstacle to revolution. So children have to be corrected. Their innocence has to be targeted. And so this threat to innocence and this fetishizing of victimhood in these two evils are both an attack on a very spiritual dynamic that I think you might identify if you are familiar with Christianity, which is that Jesus Christ is the one truly innocent victim who ended all the patterns of scapegoats through mythology, through sacrificially sacrificing in various religions throughout time. His perfect innocence ended the cycle of scapegoating. And it's his innocence and his victimhood that are most tried to be encapsulated by the woke movement. Innocence and victimhood. And there's an interesting comment that Richard Dawkins, a scientist, atheist, made recently, connecting this sort of spiritual connection as well, which is in the Catholic Church, we have something called transubstantiation, where the bread and the wine become the body and blood of Jesus Christ. The accidents, meaning the accidental physical properties of the bread, remain the same. Nothing changes. But the substance, if you have substantival metaphysics, this essence of the thing is utterly transformed. And that this, he said, is what he sees happening in the transgender movement. This is coming from a non-Catholic, which is fascinating to me that he made this connection. That the transgender movement is another claim to you shall be as gods in this way. These are my words, not his, but still, that everything physically can remain the same, but in your soul changes gender. You become transformed. This is a play, another grab on something that is a deification. And I think that this spiritual dynamic is also evident in one of the key targets of the movement, which is fatherhood. Fathers, every revolutionary from Marx to Marcuse knew you had to depose the father. You have to depose the father, right? And one of the ways you can see how effective this has been is in a very iconic Christian story we talked about last night at dinner, which is the Good Shepherd, the story of the Good Shepherd. If you think about this story, which Jesus talks about in the Gospels, you think about, the art that we see about it, or the way that we talk about it, which is a bucolic, light-filled field with, our Lord and sheep, fluffy and petting and lovely and comforting, right? It's something that will comfort us. Every listener at that time would have understood that this was not a bucolic, sweet, saccharine job. The job of the shepherd was a grisly one. He had to fight off predators with little more than a staff, sometimes beastly, really terrifying predators. At night, there was no gate. There was an opening to the sheepfold, and he would lay his body, literally and metaphorically, at the opening of the gate in order to lay his life down for the sake of protecting his sheep. And the fact that we've reduced that story to something saccharine, I think, is a sign of all the ways in which we have reduced the idea of real evil and real innocence and the role of the father, who is called to lay his life down. Biological fathers, spiritual fathers, mentors, and also this is who we need to understand God to be, that he goes to war and he goes to battle, and he knows that the bucolic field is for the next life, not this one. It is he who is the target and he who is the remedy, along with fathers in this world. So what to do? I think that we have to think of those three roles in that scene, the sixth sense, and know that people need to be healed, people need to be enlightened, and people that need to be stopped. But I think there's a fourth person that's missing in that scene. I was at actually my alma mater, and one of the professors said, I don't identify with any of those people they're saying, heal, enlightened, or awaken. He's like, I think that I know that this is wrong, but I just don't feel like I can stick my neck out and say anything. And I was like, okay, you're like a nurse in the room who knows that the mom is sick, who knows that this is poison, who knows that this is the wrong course of action, who knows that this is harming, possibly killing the child. And you don't know, you just want to keep your head down and not say anything. And so there's a lot of people who are in that place too, and I don't want to be too harsh on them, but I also kind of want to be a little shaking them out of their comfort zone, because they need to be encouraged, right? They need to have courage. And I think that us speaking out is a way to encourage that in them as well. So there are true victims, and that their victimhood is exploited for this movement and makes it more ferocious, the political tribe. There are people who I think are open to seeing how they're wrong. Maybe they've not been paying attention, but more and more I'm seeing that people cannot no longer deny the obvious lies that they've been existing in and through for so long and are looking for some answer, and we need to be there ready to give them one. And then there are people who need to be stopped. And I'm going to conclude with an author who my friend Aaron Chiatti introduced me to recently. His name is Václav Benda. I commend him to you. He was a Czech dissident. He was a friend and contemporary of Václav Havel, the more famous of the Czech dissidents. And he wrote an essay called The Parallel Polis. And in it, he says that we need to be establishing communities, maybe like something that you all have here in Illinois, through Awake Illinois, Awake America, and through Moms for Liberty, and through the schools that I've heard that you are starting here. These are amazing, important institutions to start. Why? Because we need people to know what it feels like to live deeply human lives. And the more that's stripped out of your life and stripped out of your society, the more that you are existing and walking through environments where you have to lie or you have to watch what you say, the more that the experience of being in a freewheeling, actually free, fully human community is going to awaken in you a desire to have that more and more. And the key to these societies is that they have to be appealing enough that they will invite in someone who's not Christian at all, someone who is maybe a Muslim, someone who's from any walk of life, someone who just wants to be a human, and still not diluted in their message, but still welcoming to all groups of people. And the way this is distinct from like a Rod Dreher type retreat kind of under siege mentality is that this is for the sake of spreading something and stopping the movement at hand. There's an excellent quote that I'll end on that Václav Benda uses, where he says, "There's a fundamental difference between the natural resistance of life to totalitarianism and the deliberate expansion of the space in which the parallel polis can exist. The former is a cluster of flowers that has grown into place accidentally, sheltered from the killing winds of totalitarianism, and easily destroyed when those winds change direction. The latter is a trench whose elimination depends strictly on a calculated move by the state power to destroy it. Given the time and means available, only a certain number of the trenches can be eliminated. If at the same time the parallel polis is able to produce more such trenches than it loses, a situation arises that is morally dangerous for the regime. It is a blow at the very heart of its power. That is the possibility of intervening anywhere without limitation. The mission of the parallel polis is to constantly conquer new territory, to make its parallelness constantly more substantial and more present." Thank you.
Thank you, Noelle. I'm going to introduce Dr. James Lindsay, who is a friend of mine, and I consider him a profile in courage. He has consistently displayed courage, that indispensable virtue integral to the founding of our country. He adheres to core principles that too many have abandoned and displays the ultimate test of courage, which is when you fight battles, even those you know you're likely to lose, simply because it's the right thing to do. Dr. Lindsay is a mathematician, a scholar, a podcaster, a lecturer, an expert in all things woke, and he infamously coined the popular and eventually banned social media meme, "OK Groomer." His incursion into the culture wars began when he co-wrote with two colleagues 20 articles that promoted deliberately absurd, morally questionable ideas like the conceptual penis as a social construct, and submitted them to academic peer-reviewed journals. And through these series of hoax articles known as grievance studies, Lindsay and his colleagues introduced all of us to, in the non-academic world, world to the sheer insanity of woke activists who have captured our Western institutions. Today, James continues to help us make sense of what's happening in our culture through his lectures and podcasts. He's an expert in postmodern theory, Marxist critical theories like critical race theory and queer theory. And what he does so great is he carefully unpacks these difficult to understand philosophical underpinnings of what is the open rebellion against Western civilization. He's written 6 books, including his most recent, The Marxification of Education. He's the founder of New Discourses. He has almost 400,000 followers on Twitter, over 115,000 followers on YouTube. He recently spoke in Oxford and at the European Parliament. He's a frequent lecturer with Charlie Kirk. His most recent podcast with Ben Shapiro was just released on the Daily Wire, and he recently sat down with Dr. Jordan Peterson, and that podcast will be released soon. But of all these honors and accolades, he will tell you that his greatest accomplishment is helping regular folks like myself, moms like me, stand up to woke tyranny, which engulf us every day. And he's truly one of the nicest, most down-to-earth, famous people in this movement, which is why his favorite accolade, the title in which he takes the most pride, is King of the Moms. So please welcome my good friend, Dr. James Lindsay.
I always have to set a stopwatch because otherwise we're going to be here all night. So, there's like a billion things. I usually try to pick up something somebody said that I can make a joke about to warm up the crowd, and like everything is a possibility. This lady stood up in the middle of my talk, first real public lecture I ever gave after grad school, and she stands up and she says, "All you're talking is about social issues. Social justice is about economics. You haven't mentioned it once." And I thought, oh, lady, everything has changed right out from under you. And so for the last 5 years or so, or 6 years, I guess now, I've been trying to figure out what has changed out from under us. And that's kind of what I want to communicate. Now, normally, I spend my time on social media, a lot of it. So I would do, as they said, say the OK Groomer thing. There's nobody in here I can say that to, so that's also good news. And now we're out of good news. But it is true, though, that the difference between how many people were awake and how asleep they were just not 6, but even 2 years ago. I would go give talks 2 years ago and tell people Marxism is here in America, and they would stare at me like I was crazy. I know they would stare at me like I was crazy and not paying attention, which I autistically interpreted to be what they were doing, because the people who invited me told me the donors are freaked out by what you said. Nobody 2 years ago was ready to hear the answer to the fundamental question that is before us this evening is Marxism in America? The answer is yes, it most certainly is. It has been here. It is now activated, which is a different circumstance altogether and far worse. What initiated with the death of George Floyd and actually the initiation of COVID-19 in 2020 back to back was the initiation of a cultural revolution in its active phase in this country, meant to transform our country, meant to transform our institutions, but more importantly, to transform our population according to the designs of the broad Marxist movement. Now, this is confusing. Place after place, person after person I talk to now all over the world stares at me and says, "James, I'm with you. Something's wrong, but it can't be Marxism because it's obviously fascism. It's using corporations." I have an answer for that. That's another 30-minute talk. I think this is a very important thing to understand, and that's kind of what I want to unpack tonight is what in the world, how is this Marxism if it's using corporations? How is this Marxism if it doesn't look like the kind of things that you kind of picture from whether it's the 1910s and 1920s or the 1930s or the 1940s or the 1950s. And then we get to the 1960s, and that's where we get our answer to start to unfold to us. Because in 1968, there were protests, kind of similar to what we've experienced for the last few years. Started a little in 67, unfolded massively in 68, very famously in Paris in May. They're there. Michel Foucault, the great postmodernist, is out there in his little turtleneck and his fancy jacket, throwing rocks, but getting no dust on his jacket, throwing rocks at the establishment. That's literally true. I mean, I may have limp-wristed him a little bit there for reasons, but the fact of the matter is that he did throw rocks in his fancy dress at the whatever building they were throwing rocks at there in Paris, while studiously not getting dirty, which I think is very typical. But at these protests, they unfolded into 69 and they basically kind of died. They did not get the revolution here in the West that they thought they were going to, with the cultural or neo-Marxist revolution that had unleashed. And they chanted something in 68 in those protests and those revolutions, 3 names. And those are the 3 names we're really I want to talk about. Those are Marx, Mao, Marcuse. Marx, Mao, Marcuse. Marx, Mao, Marcuse. See how it gets addictive if we do it. Marx, Mao, Marcuse. That's the name of, if we might, I'm not supposed to do this, by the way. I have a Southern Poverty Law Center extremist profile out on me now because I promote the cultural Marxism conspiracy theory, which is apparently anti-Semitic. So I'm a bad guy now. Good to meet you. So is Moms for Liberty, so is everybody. They chanted those names because those names represented what they stood for, and the cultural Marxist revolution was unfolding, and they were promoting it, and they were fans of it, and their inspirations were Karl Marx, Mao Zedong, and Herbert Marcuse. And I'm going to parlay into a 4th name that doesn't start with an M that they didn't name yet because he didn't have power yet. But she might be able to tell you some about him if it doesn't derail her, but that's Deng Xiaoping, which is a name that we don't hear that often, but we need to know here in the West. So what is happening? Marx. How is it happening? Mao and Marcuse. Where are they going? Marcuse and Deng. So Marcuse is a stand-in for the 2 of those. You had to straddle this. That wasn't as powerful as it could have been. Marx is what's happening, but we can't understand it. This is what I told the folks at the European Parliament. They called me over there. They said, you guys in America have lost your friggin' minds. Did you all know that y'all went woke? I was like, I'm aware. Did you know that that's an American ideology coming to Europe now and ruining Europe? And I was like, no. This is German. Do not even. And the Germans in the room were like, it is not possible. This is German idealism that has mixed with French romanticism that got passed through the American filter and now is being brought back to Europe, and the chickens are coming home to roost, as they say. So I talked to them, though, and they wanted to know what woke was. They wanted to understand why woke is a threat to Europe, because while they are socialist as get out in Europe, they are not very woke. Turns out they all know what a man is. They all know what a woman is. Nobody's confused. Men are supposed to be men. Women are supposed to be women. They think the race thing is ridiculous. They're super confused at what's happening all around them. So they want to get out ahead of it. And that's why they brought me to Europe, to Brussels, to speak before members of parliament and students, which was a great honor. And the video went viral, so that turned out good. What I told them is we have to take a step back. We have to understand Marx differently. If you think that Marx was an economist, you missed the point. For 150 years, we've missed the point. Marx was not an economist. 100 million people died because we thought Marx was an economist. We criticized Marx as an economist. Marx was not an economist. Marx was a theologian. Marx created an upside-down, inverted, I'll just say the word that I was surprised to not hear from Noelle, satanic religion. Marx created a religion of man creating man, and that's the key point. The question for Marx was, how does man create man? And what Marx concluded, without getting into all the Gnostic stuff, is that man creates man by creating society, which in turn creates social conditions that create the people who live in that society. So man creates man from one generation to the next by erecting social structures that constrain who he can be, limit who he can be, and ultimately imprison him. And if we enlighten to this fact and realize our true nature was not to be oppressive to one another, to construct political power over one another, but to be free totally free social beings who recognize that we're social beings, socialist man, or a species being as he called it, then we could free ourselves of this rotten and self-imposed limitation and condition and enter into a kind of heavenly utopia, a kingdom of not God, but man on earth that's perfectly realized. And so when Marx said, how does man create man? He said, well, economic conditions create man. You want to know why Marx thought economic conditions create man? Why we confuse him for an economist and let 100 million people die because we got him wrong? Because Marx didn't want to get a job. It's not more complicated than that. Marx is like, I'm a brilliant writer. Why can't anyone recognize how brilliant I am except in German? His accent was a little different. Why can't I have my living handed to me for my brilliance when I'm producing this theory that could transform humanity and set us free? And instead, I'm expected to have to earn wages to pay my bills. If I were free from my economic conditions, I would be able to write, I'd be able to do, I'd be able to be who I want, hunt in the morning, fish in the afternoon, and critique theory in the evening was his ideal that we'd all be able to do. I might have got the morning and afternoon backwards. Maybe you fish in the morning and hunt. Who cares? He didn't want to get a job, so he was like, economic conditions are oppressing me. I'm not recognized for my malignant narcissistic brilliance because I have to get a job or convince somebody to pay my bills. So economic conditions make man. So what do? We seize the means of production of economic conditions, so we remake man in a different way. More and more and more free, which she's going to tell you all about, how great and free that model is when unleashed on humanity. Spoiler, 100 million people die. Turns out not to elevate anybody except for like the 18 people at the top or whatever the number happens. It's probably 17. That's another Gnostic thing. So Marx believed that if we seize the means of production of man, which is contained in the idea of economic private property, then we can recreate man however we want. And once we realize that this is the religion that Marx put forth and everything that he wrote afterwards, starting with the Manifesto in 1848 through Capital in 1867 and so on, is just kind of noise justifying that project, that theological project. How do we understand man as who he is and recreate him into who he was always supposed to be? Then we can understand that economic conditions, and I'm going to use a big word here, are fungible. They can be changed out for other sets of conditions. If we say that the fundamental project of Marx is to understand that man is imprisoning man by his very nature, by his construction of social conditions, and if we ask how man makes man, and we say let's take a step back and look at that in a different light, then we can change the conditions. Maybe it's economic conditions because Marx doesn't want to get a job, and you get Marxism, what we call Marxism. Maybe it's racial conditions because Angela Davis is pissed off. And that's about the end of it. A black activist radicalized by Herbert Marcuse in sunny Southern California was angry that she wasn't getting a perfectly racially egalitarian society and turned to Marxist analysis to say racial conditions condition man. Man is made through racial cultural politics. Or maybe it's somebody who felt like they were an outsider, like Michel Foucault with his limp-wristed throwing style. That's a reference to a film from the 80s. If you know what the film is, you get a cookie. It was Revenge of the Nerds. Formative film in my childhood. It's very important. Foucault was an outsider, and he wrote this really long missive building off of the feminist Simone de Beauvoir. And he said, Simone de Beauvoir said, woman is not born, but made. You become woman. And the question is, how do you become woman? I didn't get the quote right, sorry. Thank the ladies in the back, they do a great job. That's a drinking joke, by the way. She said, women are not born, what is it? One is not born but becomes woman. That's what it is. That's the quote. So Simone de Beauvoir said that. She said, well, how do you become woman? Well, either you can become woman according to the patriarchal dictates of society and become the woman that society, which is male society, wants you to be, or you can become the woman that's free of that, defining herself in her own way. Woman an sich, as it would, or Frau an sich, as it would be in the origin Hegelian German if we did that. You can break free of the patriarchal conditioning. And Foucault picks us up and says, well, what about the homosexual? Couldn't the homosexual define himself absent heterosexual? Couldn't he define himself in terms of himself? Isn't he the outsider? And then we have David Halperin, a queer theorist from the 1990s, picking up and saying, what Foucault meant by the homosexual was not somebody who is same-sex attracted, he meant queer, politically queer, defining himself in terms of his fundamental resistance to the regimes of being. And we get not critical race theory like Angela Davis, but we now get queer theory. Another way we could put this is that Marx believed that some people have access to economic power called capital, and they create other people in themselves through their relationship to capital. Angela Davis, or the critical race theorists later, Kimberly Crenshaw, might say that race is imposed by a system of racial power and dynamics, etc., and therefore mankind, human beings, she wouldn't have said men, my goodness, she was a feminist, are created through the imposition of racial characteristics, and you get CRT that falls out of that. Or we might say certain people get to define a certain form of property. Racial property would be whiteness, or sexual property that's called normalcy. I am a very normal person, y'all. I get to define that I'm normal, and people that I think are also normal, and everybody else is a weirdo. They're queer. And they will be marginalized. They will be excluded from full civic participation. They will be excluded from full citizenship, maybe. They maybe are going to be treated as medical patients. Maybe they're going to get imprisoned. Maybe they're going to get derided. Maybe they're going to be told that they live in a life of sin and must repent, or they have to live in a closet, or whatever the different things are. So there are these fundamentally different people who are not normal, but if we do the same exact analysis that the conditions of mankind that produce who man is by social conditioning, which Marx called the inversion of praxis, is determined by who gets to define normalcy, you get queer theory, or what we often call gender ideology. It's the exact same thing. These are like species within a single genus. If we think of Marx as a theologian, he's created a genus of analysis of humans. In other words, a theology. What does it mean to be a human? What's man's relationship to the world? What's his purpose in life? What must he do as duties of conscience within that? You must do activism to transform the world, blah, blah, blah. These are the things that Marx laid out. If we see that as a genus, like with animals, then we come down to the species level and we get Marxism, critical race theory, queer theory, depending on what the special form of private property is, whether it's economic material capital, whether it's whiteness as property from Cheryl Harris, a critical race theorist, whether it's normalcy in the queer theory, whether it's being a knower, somebody who's considered knowledgeable for the education theorists, the critical pedagogues as they're called under Paulo Freire's analysis, whether it's the people who get to decide what words mean, what symbols mean in postmodernism, the people who define meaning in society. This is just a Marxist theory of meaning. There are certain people who have erected themselves the arbiters of what the symbols, the words, the signs that all mean. They oppress everybody who doesn't agree with them, who thinks that maybe we should interpret the book according to the way we feel about what the book says instead of what it intends. That's postmodernism. All of these Marxist species fall out immediately the second we allow ourselves to see Marx as a theologian who created an architecture, and that the means of production of mankind that have to be seized to recreate man the way he was always meant to be are fungible objects that can be traded out depending on who the theorist is. Economic, racial, sexual, gender, fat status. That's real, it's fat studies, that's one too. Ability status, that's one. Colonial status, that's a big one. That's why Europe is dead. That's why Europe is dead. You awful, evil settlers versus the poor, victimized natives. Same analysis over and over. You get 50 species of this. And this is what created the ability to move into the system that was erected. So this is Marxism in America under different identity politics guises. This created the system that allowed us to enter into Marcusian and Maoist activism in this country. Basically, Marxism was not successful in the West because, as the neo-Marxists themselves said, whether it's Max Horkheimer, whether it's Herbert Marcuse in the 1960s, they were saying openly, well, it turns out, guys, Marx missed a mark. Capitalism does not immiserate the worker. It allows him to build a better life. That's an exact quote. It allows him to build a better life. Marcuse said it delivers the goods. It gives you a good life. And truly, he said it is a good life, but it's not an ideal life. And so that stability, that economic stability that the West had through freedom, through market economies, I won't say capitalism, that stabilizes a society. And a stable society, like Noelle said, will not revolt. You will not get your revolution. So in countries that have advanced capitalism, you don't get immiserated workers. You don't get revolutionaries. You get conservative, salt-of-the-earth workers, conservative, salt-of-the-earth farmers who are content with the lives that they're able to build, the families that they get to grow up with, the little trinkets and gadgets and Corvette or whatever that they get to buy and be proud of that they earned, the little home that they build, the kids that they raise, and that prevents them from true happiness. They have euphoria and misery, Marcuse said. So what happened is if we take this genus species thing, and I know this maybe is a tough crowd for the next word I'm about to say, so I'll say it the Christian way. If we take evolution seriously, if we take ideological evolution seriously, what you had, think about a virus maybe that adapts to something that we didn't just experience. It has certain hosts that it can't get into. We have the Marxism virus. It can't infect the West. The West has economic mobility. You can work hard. You can build a good life. But if it goes into identity politics, it can get right in through the ACE2 receptors and give you Marxism 19. If it goes in through, as Marcuse said, the ghetto population, the feminists, the sexual minorities, and the outcasts, then it can get in through identity politics instead of coming in through economic manipulation. Now, Marcuse didn't come up with this idea himself. Turns out, Mao Zedong pioneered this concept. He was the first. He didn't actually come up with it himself either. Let's not give this bumpkin he was a country bumpkin. Let's not give Mao more credit. He borrowed this from Stalin. Stalin said that after we get the economic part, then we're going to unleash the cultural part and we're going to get true equality. And so Mao, actually not a big friend of Stalin, decided, well, let's just do this straight out. And he invented an identity politics mechanism that conquered China in the Cultural Revolution. He came up with, as we'll hear a lot more soon, he came up with 10 identity categories originally. It expanded for convenience later. Some of these were coded black, which was bad, and some of them were coded red, which is good. And if you had a black identity, you were the worst of the worst. You were, I think the word is deplorable, or unvaccinated, or racist, or homophobe, transphobe, ableist, fat-phobic, whatever the things you've been called for, the conservative, Republican, probably just Christian nationalist for sure. You get called these names, and you are essentially disenfranchised by your identification in one of these categories. On the other hand, there are the revolutionaries. Communism is red, as everybody in a good red state in America knows. Oh, wait, awkward. They did that on purpose, folks. They did that on purpose. Illinois is a red state. The red identities were for communism. Those were your revolutionaries. They're also, you have to pay pittance. The workers with their hammer, the peasants with their sickle, automatic red category. So if you were dirt poor and busting your balls to work for your daily bread, you get automatic red category. Unless you stood up to the government, then you're a black category. Because the real black categories were things like counter-revolutionary, bad influence, right-wing person. Aren't those friendly? And the red categories were revolutionary this, revolutionary that, revolutionary the other thing, worker peasant. On our side, on our side, on our side. That's what the deal was. And if you were a black identity, your kids were a black identity. We have a black identity person here tonight. She can tell you about it. Didn't matter what you did. Maybe your grandfather owned some rich land. Maybe he had 2 walks in his farm. He could cook, 2 dishes at once. You were a black identity because your grandfather was rich. And so they bullied you. They harassed you. Eventually, at the height of the Red Guard, it became legal to kill you in the street. But if you were a red identity, you were celebrated. I think the word we use today is affirmed. You were affirmed. You were celebrated. You were uplifted. You were given privileges. You were given extra rights, as it were, and you were treated like a first-class citizen instead of a second-class citizen. And Mao unleashed this identity politics to create a pressure pump for the people that were in black identities to become revolutionaries and be a red identity. The way you got there is by doing things like denouncing your family, taking part in revolutionary activities, tearing down statues, pledging more and more loyalty, self-criticism, 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 apologizing for being born white or something, trying to be less white. Oh, I've confused my epics again. It's the exact same model. And what Mao fueled this with was a formula he called unity, criticism, unity. He said that he came up with this in 1942, so he probably stole it from Stalin. Unity, criticism, unity. He says you induce a desire for unity. I think the word we use today is belonging. Don't you just want a space where everybody belongs? Everybody can feel like they belong? But then you criticize the people that are keeping you from having unity. We could have national unity, but we have a pandemic of the unvaccinated. We could have national unity, but too bad 2 people in here are transphobes, and our trans brothers and sisters can't feel comfortable. She, sure, or ear, air, or whatever the hell. They can't feel comfortable. It's your fault for upholding racism that our people of color, sisters or something of color, can't feel safe in this space. So we would have this unity that we desire. People would feel like they belong, except we cannot, because some of you harbor bourgeois values or racism or sexism or transphobia. And so we can't have true unity. And then Mao said on the other side of this, we'll have unity according to a new basis, which he called socialist discipline. We call it sustainability and inclusion. It's the exact same model. So the what that's happening in America is Marxism. The how that's happening in America by way of Herbert Marcuse is Maoism. Like I said, Marcuse is not as smart as we give him credit. He worked for the OSS, which is the precursor to the CIA, and he had access to Mao's files that the federal government had been collecting, spying on China as Mao rose to power. He knew what Mao was doing. So he created the same program. It's like, I'm a genius. And what a shock that it's the same program. We're going to use all this identity politics, which evolved by the 90s into the early 2000s, into the woke intersectional monstrosity that we see today. Intersectionality is Maoism in the West, period. Its goal is to induce a desire for unity that they call belonging, to involve in criticism of your racism, sexism, vaccination status, whatever, so that we can have unity according to a new basis, which is going to be sustainable and inclusive future. That's it. That's intersectionality. So the how of what's happening is Maoism. But what's the mechanism? This is what I promised you I'd talk about. How in the world did they get by and start using corporations? Well, the fact is that the old left died with Marcuse. When Marcuse said that the working class is stabilized by advanced capitalism, what he was saying is Marxism in the future doesn't have to pretend to care about workers. And we can therefore pursue power where power really is. And so he lays out this program that he didn't name that's called the Long March Through the Institutions, credited to another guy, Rudi Dutschke, which was borrowed from Mao, and which was adapted from the Marxist Antonio Gramsci, who said socialism is precisely the religion that must overwhelm Christianity. And the way that Gramsci said it would work, the way that Mao applied it, and the way that Marcuse said that it must go in the West would be that we're going to now infiltrate the institutions. We're going to go inside, do the job, and bring our ideology with us, starting with education at all levels. This was in Counter-Revolution and Revolt, 1972. Marcuse wrote this. We're going to infiltrate every institution, especially education, and cause it to rain down on society from within. Well, guess what? Corporations or institutions, there's lots of power there. How do you make that work? Well, Henry Kissinger goes over, starts making some deals, not with Mao, although he did that too, but with his successor, Deng Xiaoping, who you probably have very little or never heard of. And Deng Xiaoping had a famous statement that I can't say in Chinese, maybe she will enlighten us. I don't care if the cat is black or white as long as it catches mice. Which meant, I don't care how we make China rich and powerful, whether we use capitalist markets or socialist mechanisms, as long as we make China powerful. And they adopted this plan to create a contained market economy under the grace of the CCP. That became the model for the world that we are now playing out in the West. The CCP had all authority. They could just say, this is how it works, and this is how it works. So if a billionaire like Jack Ma stands up and decides he's going to launch a giant IPO, the biggest thing in the world, and then says the CCP's got some problems, Jack Ma disappears and comes back 80 days later not a billionaire or whatever it was. Because it's all under the pleasure of the party. In the West, they don't have this. They instead said, well, we've got this gigantic reservoir of pension fund money that we could leverage to activist causes and force corporations to do what we want if we could force them to subscribe to what we'll call environmental, social, and governance criteria, ESG scoring. And then we'll come up with a bunch of proxy measures to figure out how environmental and social and governance your corporation is, rank you and control everything through your stock value, through your access to credit, through your access to what they call sustainability-linked loans now, which mean if you're on the program, you get cheaper interest rates. We'll control the corporations this way from a top-down mechanism. And we're going to use the exact same model that Deng Xiaoping employed following Mao, following the concept that Marcuse was also articulating. And they created this tyranny through our corporations that's forcing woke on us, because woke is the identity politics that was born out of Marxist thought, adapted like an evolutionary virus to the West. And they needed the corporate power to be able to push it on a population that wasn't going to have it any other way. So they captured the corporations with the ESG program. And that's what's really going on. The model is, if you want to know what the future of America looks like, it's what you see in China today. It's the model that was pioneered under Deng Xiaoping using Mao's methods to get there, but the United States has a special treat, which I won't dive into, but the way station along the way is the CRT, the critical race theory way station called South Africa. So if you want to know what the next 10 years in America look like if we don't stop this, look at South Africa, then look at China. See if you want to live there, and if you don't, you better start speaking up. Because that's where we're going. So how do you speak up? Let me give you a quick tip. I just talked about this thing, ESG. There's all these proxy measurements that we've now heard about, like the Corporate Equality Index. The Human Rights Campaign is forcing everything to go into the queer politics, pride everything, rainbows on your kids, like paint your kid a rainbow or you can't have them a scholarship or something like that. This is facilitated because the Human Rights Campaign is giving a number that everybody cares way too much about. So when you see Target go woke, or really come out as woke because they've gone woke a long time ago, or you see Anheuser-Busch or Bud Light woke, or you see Ford put out a gay truck, or whatever it's called, or you see any of these corporations, whatever the next one is, Activision, is that the new one we're all mad at? You say, what's their corporate equality index look like? And you point at the thing that's making them do it. So we can force congressional hearings that get that out in the open, and we start breaking up what amounts to a gigantic, maybe the largest ever criminal racketeering scam that's ever been perpetrated on humanity. That's how we actually stop woke. You think you have no power? You absolutely have power. You make your neighbor and everybody else that you can think of aware that this isn't just Bud Light going woke. It's an extortion racket forcing Bud Light to go woke, and that's illegal until your pathetic politicians finally gin up the not courage but necessity to say something about it and start having hearings enforcing the issue, and eventually prosecutions follow when we get out of this nightmare. That's how we get out of this. And it turns out that the awareness raising part of the program is where we're at. You think you want to go do something, what do? You raise awareness. People don't know yet. Everything I just said to you, most of it, I think much of that is at least new details in many regards for people. You'll go home, you won't remember 3 words of it. That's fine. You've got some homework to do. And then you have to share what you learn. And you have to support organizations like this that are getting this information out and getting it more organized and getting it out there to people so that more and more people can get it, because the judges, the lawyers, the politicians who are going to get it last have to get it. And it starts with you getting it and you telling other people who get it that it eventually makes its way to them. It's so important. So I promised Shannon I would do this to close, because this is actually super important. I understand that you're in an embattled state. I'm from Tennessee and have a slightly smaller problem load than y'all. It's real. I'm from Tennessee. I didn't make that up. What's happening in this country right now, there are people pressing very hard for what they're calling a big sort. You know what? You're a conservative. You're in Illinois. Oh my God, it's over. Get out. Go to Florida. Go to Texas. Don't come to Tennessee. I didn't say that. Don't come to Tennessee. Ignore Idaho, it doesn't exist. Get out, get to where we can. We'll fortify where we have power and take advantage of that power. That's not going to work. That is not going to work. We have to fight back everywhere. As I was saying at lunch today, if you guys saw the movie Office Space, there's that scene, they got the character Michael Bolton, he's a little dork, but then there's the musician Michael Bolton that plays the clarinet or whatever. And they're like, why don't you just change your name? Why don't you just go by Mike? And he says, why should I be the one to change? He's the one who sucks. This is the attitude. This is your home. You should fight for this. And I'm going to make it a mission personally. I told Shannon this today. I'm going to make it a mission to make sure that the people who have resources, money, political power, etc., start to understand in this country that we need pockets of resistance in Illinois, in Wisconsin, in New York, in California. Because strategically, the home is the most important part. To speak strategically, if we sacrifice, our entire West Coast turns out to be a little bit blue, maybe worse than here, if that's possible. If we imagine we give away our entire West Coast and all of its ports to something that's going to be directly in league with the Belt and Road Initiative with China as fast as it can legally do it. Is that a good strategy for the rest of us? No. We have to fight back for every one of these 50 states. We have to fight back for this country. We have to fight back for our homes. We have to protect our children. It's not as easy for everyone to move. In fact, most people can't. Florida's getting expensive. Tennessee just sucks. Just don't come. It's terrible. The mountains are ugly, famously bad. The air smells terrible. It's like an industrial wasteland. Don't come. We have to stay where we have to fight where we are. We must fight where we are. We have to start convincing people that the fight in Illinois matters, even if all we get is small wins. We have to convince people that the fight in New York matters, the fight in California matters. And I'll tell you, I travel this country, and I go to red states, and I go to purple states. I go to a lot of red states, by the way, and I go to blue states sometimes. And the fight in the people that I meet in blue states is way bigger than the complacent, sleepy red states with their rhino governments. If Illinois can be banded together and get behind organizations like this, or start others and start networking together and start fighting, you can make a gigantic difference in the state that absolutely throws a wrench in their program. And if they lose a state like Illinois, they're going to shake. If we take back California, they're done. It's over. They don't have another bastion like that. These fights matter. So I want to encourage you. I know you're beleaguered. I know you're tired. They want you to quit. They want you to leave. They want you to give up. They want you to stop. But you're fighting for your children and all generations after and their freedom, because it's really on the line. If this is Marxism coming through with Maoism to install the tyranny that we see in China today, but 10 times worse, which is what it will be, freedom for your children and their children forevermore is at stake. And it might take us 1,000 years to get it back if we ever do. We have to fight. We have to fight everywhere that we are. We cannot be cowards. We cannot run away. And we start simply enough by telling the truth and passing the buck up the chain every single step of the way. Thank you for letting me come talk to you here in Illinois. Unlike your friends at Northwestern, nobody cheered for Mao. I spoke at Northwestern a month ago. They cheered for Mao. They laughed at me. I threw back at them. Some kid did this to me while I was talking, so I did this back to him during my speech. This is very important, though. We have to fight back, and you guys are the future of Illinois if you're willing to pick up the fight and do it. Thank you so much for letting me come.
Wow. Great speeches. Noelle, James, really great content there. I am so excited to introduce our next speaker. When Shannon told me that I was going to be introducing She Van Fleet, I was super excited because I am fascinated with her background and her story. They always say strong, American women are strong and mothers are really strong, but there is nothing like immigrant mothers. They're tough as nails. And when you meet someone like she, you realize how strong and the intense background that she has to fight her way here to America. So I'm really excited to introduce her. Tonight is the first night I got to meet her, and Shannon introduced me to her, and I said, I said, how do you say her name? And she said, it's my pronoun. And it took 30 seconds for me to realize what she was saying. So now I will always remember your name as she, and everybody in this audience will remember your name as she. So let me give you a little background on she. She was just 6 years old when the Communist Revolution began in China. And having escaped from China as a young woman, she has become a passionate advocate for freedom, democracy, and human rights. And as a survivor of Mao's Cultural Revolution, which James talked a little bit about, she has firsthand experience with the pitfalls of unchecked state power, which has kindled her unwavering commitment to preserving and celebrating the liberties we enjoy here in America. Like our hosts and sponsors and many others here in this audience, including myself, a daughter of immigrants from the Middle East searching for a better life, she recognizes the profound importance of standing up for our fundamental values and freedoms. So let's warmly welcome Van Fleet, and she shares her knowledge and experience and insights on Marxism today. Thank you.
Thank you. How do I get the?
Here we go.
No. Okay. Hi. Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone, and thank Shannon to invite me here. And I'm schooled. I'm behind two great speakers. Especially Dr. James Lindsay. I've been following Dr. James Lindsay for a long time, way before I started my activism. So I consider him my teacher. Anyway, I'm so glad to be here. And Shannon asked me to answer the question to start the presentation. Is Marxism here in America? Absolutely. It is here in America. I'm saying so not because it's my opinion. No. I'm saying it because I lived through one in China. I'm living through one here in America. They are the same. So that's my answer. Oh, no. Sorry, how do I? Okay, so I want to talk about the Marxism based on my own experience. So I just gave you the answer, but don't take my answer. Just say what they are telling us. They are not shy about it. All this woke movement is Marxism. And we can see it from BMM. We can see it from trans movement, and we can see it from Antifa. It is indeed Marxist revolution in America. So let me tell you a little bit of myself. And I spent my first 26 years in China. I was in my first grade when the Cultural Revolution started. And that lasted for 10 years until Mao's death. And that was before I graduated from high school. After 10 years of Cultural Revolution, there's nothing there. The economy is totally in ruins, and there's nothing for young people. There's no jobs. So what Mao did, he sent all of us to the countryside and told us we should go to the countryside to be re-educated by the peasants. So I went there and spent 3 years in the field working with the peasants. So that was my experience in China until Mao died, and I was able to go to college and later come to America when I was 26 in 1986. During that 10 years of Cultural Revolution, that is my entire school years. Mao cut it from 12 to 10 years because he wanted to turn out socialist builders faster. And during that 10 years, I lost entire 2 years during the Cultural Revolution because schools were closed. Now, when I see the American kids losing 2 years during the COVID, that's just a painful reminder of what I went through. So what did I do in those 2 years? I absolutely had the front row of watching what's unfolding in front of me, the Cultural Revolution. So I'm absolutely the one that witnessed everything. So in order to talk about the Cultural Revolution, I have to talk about those three important figures. Of course, we know Marxism comes from Karl Marx. And so Karl Marx predicted wrongly that the capitalist system is an evil system because it is a system of exploitation, and that the proletarians, the poor working people, will rise up and overthrow the system and overthrow the bourgeois, which is factory owners, people with property. And that would happen where? That would happen in the most industrialized countries such as Great Britain, Germany, or France. It was wrong. It did not happen there. So instead, it happened in a backwarded country like Russia. And so he was a theorist. He never get to see the revolution. And so, but his followers want to carry on his mission to overthrow capitalism. And they know that his prediction did not work. So they have to, because like Dr. James Lindsay said, capitalism created wealth. And in America, we have this great American dream that everyone can come here with nothing and build a fortune or build wealth or build their own dream, or however they defined it. So they have to come up with something else. And in the 1930s, this guy, the communist, it's an Italian communist, Antonio Gramsci, come up with this idea that we can do it through culture. We can do it through taking over the institution and taking over the country by replacing the ideology or whatever is called hegemony with the Marxist ideology. He also was a theorist. He never saw it happen. He died in prison, even though his book came out, and the prison notebook. And you know who brought it to America, do you? Buttigieg, yeah, the father of the transportation secretary. He brought it to America. Anyway, so both of them did not get to see what they proposed. So the third person is very important. That's Mao. He did both. He first carried out a Marxist revolution in China. He did not have proletariats because China was not an industrialized country. So he substituted the proletarians with poor peasants. He successfully overthrew a sitting government called the nationalists. Those people now is in Taiwan. They were kicked out of China, end up in Taiwan. So he established the communist China in 1949. 17 years later, in 1966, he carried out another revolution. That is the Chinese Cultural Revolution. What was that revolution was for? It was also to overthrow a sitting government. The difference is this time, that government is his own. He actually launched a revolution against CCP, his own party. Why? Because he was losing power, he thought. And he was, actually. And so he felt like he needed to get his power back by launching this cultural revolution. He has two goals. One is to get power back from the CCP, from top to bottom, every level of the government. He did not trust those people. And the second is make his version of communism, his version of Marxism, the ideology or the religion of the land. That is the Maoism. He wants to destroy everything that was part of the Chinese culture. That is Chinese 3-year civilization. So that was his goal of the Cultural Revolution, to take power back and to install Maoism as the supreme ideology of the land. He did not use the army. He did not have to. He used his own private army. Who were those in the army? The kids. He used the kids from schools and colleges. And he mobilized them, gave them power, and called them his own army. And those are called the Red Guards. Those are the indoctrinated kids from government schools and from government universities. And that's what he used to carry out his revolution. And what he really wanted to achieve for his revolution, basically, get rid of CCP, those people in power, and destroy everything of the past. And that's what he called smash the 4 olds. Old tradition, old ideas, old custom, and old habits. So topple down statues, change street names, institution names, everything that you thought was the first time that happened in history, everything that happened here happened before. Okay, there is a change in the name into an anti-imperialist road. It happened in every city, in my city, same thing. And institution names. And books were burned, and because all those are good, old ideas. During the Cultural Revolution, we had no books to read, nothing. But we have multiple copies in every household of one book. Do you know what it is? The Little Red Book. Yes, we have multiple copies. That's all we had. When the school finally reopened, we went back to school for a whole year. We have no textbooks because the textbooks that we had before was just not good enough, and old ideas should get rid of. For a whole year, Mao's Little Red Book was our textbook. And that's what we read. We read from beginning to the end and back, and some of the quotations were made into songs. So we sang when we could sing and then recite the rest. That's all we did. So everything was destroyed, but that's not enough. During in early years of the Cultural Revolution, they went to people's homes because they destroy everything in the public, but there are hidden 4 olds in homes. So they went to people's homes, got rid of whatever they considered old. Old furniture, old books, and in the process, a lot of people forever lost their family possessions, such as correspondence, manuscript, all this burned and destroyed forever. So that is the Chinese Cultural Revolution, and that is basically cancel culture. Different name, same thing. The goal is destroy everything in the past so that we can have this new ideology installed. And that's exactly what happened. When we saw this, the Chinese, and we know, this is history repeating. And it just hurt me so bad. During the 2020, the riots, I could see in the Chinese social media, the people were laughing. People say, now the Americans get their chance of their cultural revolution. Everyone could see. But the Americans mostly had no idea. They just said, what happened? What happened? They just have no idea. This is something that happened before. The reason they don't know is because, of course, this was never taught. Communism, the history and the horror and the evil of communism was not taught here. And it was not taught here on purpose. They don't want you to know. Communism has been here since 1919, 2 years after the Russian Revolution. This is nothing new. Just like Dr. Lindsay said, it has what you use the word, reactivated. Yeah, reactivated in 2020. It's always there. It is absolutely a virus. And as you said, Joseph, you said it's a mind, it's a thought cancer. Absolutely, it has been here. That's something we should know. And during my speech and meeting a lot of people, a lot of ask me, is this import from CCP? No, it's been here. It's homeborn. American Marxism is absolutely homeborn. And of course, CCP played a role to encourage that. Okay, so that was the goal. The goal is to destroy the foundation of a society. Anything traditional, anything that people hold dear had to go. But how do they do that? How do both of the speakers talked about destruction of faith, and that is absolutely what happened in China. And as soon as the communists took over, they started the destruction of all religions. In China, there's no one dominant religion. There's Buddhism, Christianity, Islam, and many other. So they destroyed all of them, but they especially hostile to Christianity because they associate it with the West. And then also they know that Christianity has this amazing ability to organize people. And so they targeted Christianity more so than any other religion. So during the Cultural Revolution, it was already destroyed so much before the Cultural Revolution, but during the Cultural Revolution, it's pretty much finished. And here is an example, the first photo of the nuns. Back then, there are still some churches remain during the Cultural Revolution. Those nuns were held in the struggle session, and soon after that, they're all expelled from China. And today, there's still Christianity. Yeah, it's still churches. But you see the second picture? Yeah, the church is there, but in the church, in the center, it's Mao's picture and Xi Jinping's picture. And there's the flag of the CCP. So it's absolutely taken over and controlled by the CCP. And they are especially going after mega churches. And that was a demolition of a big church in China. So now you can still see churches, but it's just a shell. It's just an empty shell. And that's exactly what happened in America. In order for all this cancel culture to take place, they have to destroy church, and it's not just today. Only today we can see it. Really, it's in your face. It's a frontal attack of the church. And the first photo you all recognize, that's the St. John's Church behind the White House. And now you're going around, especially in this month, I drive around and see a lot of churches with pride flags. And back then, 2020, BMM flags. So the churches are so infiltrated, and it is just so sad. Only when they destroy church can they go and destroy the foundation of this country. And of course, the other thing is, no. Arrow, okay. Yeah. Okay, there's one missing. The other step is this destruction of family. Because family is, of course, the building block of any society. And I'm surprised that I lost that. Okay, I got it wrong. It's there, I'm sorry. Destruction of a family is a must. And that's also started right away after the CCP took over China in 1949. They took over the school. They took them only 2 years to retrain the teachers. Only 2 years. So the teachers were trained with new ideas. They have to get rid of their the old tradition, the things they learned in the past. And took them 2 years to send them back to a classroom. Now, they're told they are no longer an educator. Their role is to teach the new generation Marxist ideology. I was in school. The thing we were taught is that our real parents are not our biological parents. Our real parents were the party and Chairman Mao. And so our loyalty goes first to the party. So if we see anyone that is not loyal to the party, we report them, even if that means your own parents. So the picture shows this guy. When he was 16, he saw his mother complaining about the Cultural Revolution. He and his father together reported his mother, and she was arrested. 2 months later, she was executed. And that is not an isolated case. That is very, very common. People ask me, what your parents talk to you during the Cultural Revolution? Nothing. Why? They were afraid if they taught me something that I might, and I probably would, report, because that's our duty. And so the family is totally destroyed. And then that's happening in America. When I heard the case of that, I can't remember his name, and wearing a mask, reported his father, and now his father is in jail with a 7-year sentence because he was in D.C. On January 6th. I just could not believe. This is happening in America. And now there's a whole lot more stories that we hear, that the daughter reported mother, and this is absolutely the history repeating. Above all, okay, those are tactics. You have to destroy the faith, you have to destroy family, but you have to divide people. And that is absolutely the key to any revolution. Dr. Lindsay talked a lot about identity politics. Yes, that is how Mao divide people and control us. He started, as soon as he took over China in 1949, this is the land reform. This is the starting point of identity politics to divide the nation. So the people were divided into two classes. One is called black class, another is called red class. The black class, you can kind of figure, is the bad one. So those are the rich peasants or landlord. They were considered the enemy of the state. Once you have that label on, your land were taken away. Many times your lives were taken away. Up to 2 million landlords were executed during the land reform. And once you have that label, it's become hereditary. You pass it on to your children and your children's children. And my grandmother had like 17 acres of land. My grandfather left her, so she had to rent it out to tenant farmers. For that, of course, she was condemned as a black class, part of the black class. And because of that, my father automatically entitled that label, and so did I. And I have trouble being accepted into the little red guards, the little kids, because I'm from a black class family. And this is not something, I'm sorry, this is not something you just give you a label. This is your identity. Any government papers, document, when you have to fill out, there is always a question, your class origin. Just like here, your race, your ethnicity. That is absolutely something you know, and something we know about others. In school, we know who is black, who is red. And the black were the bad ones, and the red are the good ones. And that's how they divide people. And nowadays, we denounce whiteness, right? And whiteness is evil because you're born white, you're born racist. Back then, if you're born with land, you're born evil. Same thing. It's just one is class and one is race. Okay. It is simple in China. And Mao was able to use class to divide people and continue to use that to divide people to obtain power and to maintain power. In America, class did not work well. And they know it because capitalism created this great middle class, right? And even if you're poor, if you really follow the law and just work hard, you can create wealth. So, but they still do it, like Bernie Sanders. Yeah, he still used the classic Marxist ideology of class division, and he's 1% versus 99% is exactly the number that Mao used to divide China. 99 of the poor against 1% of the rich. But that does not work that well. So they go to what? Go to race. And so we're all familiar with that. We're all living through that. But that's still enough. Here's why. Why they keep doing it. In China, Mao always have the majority against the minority. Even though the minority keep changing, but it's always majority. And how about here? It's the minority against the majority. That is a problem, right? So that's why they have to keep expanding the minority, expanding the victim group, the marginalized group. And so from race to gender, sexuality, able-bodied versus disabled, and now they found a gold mine, trans. Trans is not even what you are born with. Trans is whatever you identify as, and they will continue to expand because they need to have more against the majority. I think that is something that is very, very different of these two cultural revolutions in China and in America. And of course, intersectionality is another gold mine. And they create more victims. And they create victims against victims. So in old days, feminists are all feminists. With intersectionality, now the feminist of a different race now is considered the white feminist their enemy. So that is how I call it a gift that keeps giving. All this is to what? To divide people. Absolutely. Identity politics, I think, is division politics. Is that all about identity? And that's what we believe, right? It's really about identity. We use identity to divide people. Not really. Why? During the culture, okay, after the land reform and eventually the reform in the urban areas, nobody owned anything. Land was taken, property was taken. China actually became a classless society. Nobody really owned property. But they still use this class struggle to divide people. But by then, anyone can fall into the black class. Not because you own anything, not because you have any wealth. It's because you have the bourgeois ideology. You may be penniless, but if you think like a bourgeois, you are in the black class. And then you become the enemy of the state. And that's what happened during the Cultural Revolution. All those people were condemned into black class because they had wrong ideology. So it's really not about identity. It is about ideology. And we can see the same thing here. All those people have great identity that should protect them, right? They should be in the protected class. David Rubin, I don't know if you know him, but he's gay, and he is Jewish. Kathleen Jenner, she is transgender. And then my great lieutenant governor, I just love her, Winston Sears, she is an immigrant, she is black. They should be all considered in the protected class. But why they're not? They got the wrong ideology. They had the wrong worldview because they are all conservatives. So it's not really about identity. It is really about ideology. But is it? Is it really? Okay, here is something that's important for us to understand if you know history. Okay, this is a picture of 4 important people that have been persecuted, and many suffered a great deal. The first one is the president of China. He was the #1 victim of Mao's Cultural Revolution. He was purged and died, not in prison, but pretty much died alone and denied medical treatment. President of China. He was a communist. He himself persecuted so many people and actually killed a lot of people. But he became a victim. The second one was a general, and he was the one that led the troops in the Korean War against the Americans. Okay, the other one is the mayor of Beijing. Last one, guess who? He was the father of Xi Jinping, the present-day dictator. He was also parade by the Red Guards in the truck, they are all victims of Mao's Cultural Revolution. It's not about ideology. They are all communists. So what's it about? It's all about power. So the ideology, the identity, just a tool, just a tactic. It is all about power. And so Mao purged all of them, so he secured his power. In the process, he became the god of Chinese people. So all these people were founding fathers of the CCP. They ended just like the poor peasant and the landlord during the land reform. All ended miserably. So we're not there yet in America, but it's coming. So I just want you to know what happened to the communists in China. So this is the person who was considered a celebrated female author and writer. And so the first picture showing her as a bourgeois young girl. She was from a bourgeois family, a well-to-do family, a gentry family. And then she became woke. She became progressive. And then and she became attracted to communism. So the third photo showing her she has becoming a communist. Also, see what happened to her. She lost her gender identity in the process. Yeah, that's what happened to communism. So the third picture showing she became a communist, and she was given a lot of power and to basically run the affairs of writers and after the revolution succeeded. So she's the winner, right? Not so fast. The last picture showing her, she was denounced as a rightist and denounced as a member of the black class and enemy of the state. Why? She dared to think some thoughts that were not allowed. And that's communism. And that's the things that left have no idea because they don't know history. And they think they are on the winning side. And some history lesson will really help them. Remember the Red Guards. The Red Guards were given the power by Mao. They were given the power to rebel. And that's the slogan. Rebelling is justified because Mao allowed them to do that and Mao support them. They terrorized the whole country. They destroyed the Chinese civilization. They killed so many people during the Cultural Revolution. Up to 20 million Chinese died. What happened to them? They got the power for Mao, and they destroyed Chinese civilization. And then, after their usefulness is over, they were sent to the countryside to get the real education from the peasants. And I was the last one to join them, to have 3 miserable years of my life working in the fields. So this is also something that the left were never taught. Of course they were never taught. They won't end well either. So I have to talk a little bit about my activism. I am a totally accidental activist. That's why Dr. James Lindsay said, so many people got weakened. I'm one of them. And I have been here for 30-some years. And even though I always go and vote, never missed a presidential election, but I never really get into the politics, really did not take the time and the trouble to learn about what is the history of this country and then the politics until I start to see troubling signs. So I think in the past 10 years, I've spent a lot of time reading and catch up the things I did not know, even though I know what happened in China, but to learn about why America is so special, why I love America so much. I did a lot of study, and of course, Dr. Lindsay helped me so much to understand the American cultural Marxists. So in 2020, I joined the Loudoun County Republican Committee, and that's when I went to the school board. And I thought that's just local, I just go there as a resident. Have no idea that Fox News called the following day. I was just terrified because I was never a speaker. And even though I went there and gave 1-minute speech with the cover of the mosque, and now I have to make a big decision whether I want to take the next step. And actually, I just said, it's not my choice. It is not my choice. This is not about me anymore. So I decided, I said yes, and since then, I become a voice, and the voice of someone who have lived experience of communism, and someone can warn Americans that this is what we are facing. So anyway, I'm not a speaker, I'm speaking. I'm not a writer, I wrote a book. And so, the only thing I can say is God's will. I just have, anyway, so this book is coming out in October, and in it, I laid out all the parallels. There are just too many. I can't cover them all in the 30-minute speech or a 1-hour interview. So check it out. It's already in Amazon. In it, Dr. Lindsay wrote Moving Forward for me. I'm just so grateful. Okay, we have to talk about what to do, right? They all talk about, and of course, Dr. Lindsay gave us exactly the idea of what we should do, but I just kind of pretty much repeated. Okay, so first we have to understand, still so many people, I'm talking about conservatives, do not understand what we are up to. It's not the left going wild. It's not just some woke, going cancel culture. It is communism. It is absolutely communism. So we have to understand that, and we have to expose that, and we have to resist, just like Dr. Lindsay said. But also I have to say, we have to get organized. This is something that is amazing, that a lot of people just wonder why. Why the left are so committed, right? They don't sleep. They absolutely just so committed and determined. Why? Because they're communists. That's all I can say. Organizing masses is in the DNA of communism. Mao organized the peasants. That's how he got into power. He organized the youth. That's how he got the power back. And in CCP, they have party branch in every level of the society. As long as you have like a 12 or 17 people, there is a party branch. Everyone is organized by the CCP. And how about here? The Democrats, they organize, right? How did Obama got into White House? He organized the community. As a community organizer, he organized his way to the White House. So all I can say is that we have to organize. I always wonder, why the conservatives just don't get organized because we think we're all individuals. I think that's the reason. We are individuals. We have our own thoughts. Why organize, right? This is the country that you have your own ideas. You all individuals. Not anymore. If we have to fight and win, we have to get organized. Before I joined the organization, I was just someone just complain about it and call people, that share my idea, and then we share the same frustration. Once I joined the organization, I'm part of a group that then I was able to, get emails and then go to school board and do this and that is the strength. And I think we have to. If we have to win this war, we have to get organized. I think that's all I can say. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. God bless you. The second school, it's already up there, is our second charitable pledge. And this is very personal for me because I had the pleasure of meeting Pastor Randy Bland, who has been a headmaster at Families of Faith, which is a church and a school. And he stood up to the state's tyranny and led by example and put the armor over his congregation and students and recognized the hunger in communities across the state that they are ready to put the armor over their community's children too. So I would like to welcome Pastor Randy Bland, El Crespo, and the Wong family to come forward because they are actually opening schools throughout the state. And there's one that is growing here in Naperville. Come on up, Wongs. Growing here in Naperville, and I can speak to the testimony because our youngest of 3, we pulled from public schools. We did not feel our 8-year-old was safe. And with the sexual indoctrination coming down, she doesn't have the autonomy and constitution to defend against it. And so we were so proud to be able to send her to Faith Christian Academy in Naperville. And again, it's an emotional thing for me because I saw the ministry that they do. I saw it firsthand. And it's $4,000, and it doesn't seem like a lot, but that's what we thought we could raise. And we hope that as you tell the story of Courageous Conversations, that you will contribute to our pillar of philanthropy because it is doing amazing, amazing work, especially in the state. So I'd like to give this to Pastor Randy and Al and the Wong family. The Wongs have 4 children that they pulled from Naperville 203 schools to be enriched at the ministry of this school. So congratulations to Faith Christian Academy.
Shannon hands me a mic everywhere I go, and very much appreciate her partnership and the contribution that she's making also in the state of Illinois. And certainly thank you for these resources. We are currently starting a new school in Springfield in the inner city. This fall, it's going to be the first tuition-free school. It's an all-black community. It's literally 1 block away from the public school. And not one student in this school can meet basic proficiency rates. They're as much as 3 years behind their current grade level. They've got 4th grade students that not one student can read or write. And we've been given a building that used to be their public school building. A church purchased it 20 years ago with no idea what they were going to do with it. And when they heard what we were doing, they asked if we'd be willing to come and help them start a school. So this August, we're going to open that school in Springfield. We've got lots of volunteers. We've got people that are helping us financially. If you want to write a check, we'd be glad to meet you at the door on the way out, and you can help with that effort. But Shannon, thank you very much for all that you do. You know, the Bible tells us that God has raised up a lot of champions. You think about Daniel and David and many more. And you're one of the champions in your team here in Illinois. We appreciate you very much. So.
Well, I've been inspired tonight by all these people speaking, and I'm off script too now, but it's something really struck me talking about fighting for what we need here in Illinois, and to see what these schools are doing, see what she was talking about, Mr. Bauman, who was on the school board with me, and I saw him fight against things that he shouldn't have had to fight against. And he stood up for his faith, and now we've moved on, and he helped started Olmus Academy, and that's changing people's lives. And we were small potatoes, our little school. And I think Noelle and I talked about it today, just kind of joking. You know, there's a saying, it's not about the size of the dog in the fight. It's about the size of the fight in the dog. And these people have fight. And everyone here needs to go home and talk to other people and have them ready to fight some way, any way, whatever way is your way to fight. But you have to do it. And we can make change if we do that.
All right, so we have some time. It's limited, but we did want to invite our speakers up to the stage for a brief Q&A, and so I'm going to actually entrust you, Scarlett, with the Q&A. So as people raise hands, you're going to... So real quickly, so quick questions. I know that we get very excited to introduce ourselves to speakers, and we want to have a bonding moment. This is about questions, okay? So we're going to be very thorough and efficient in asking a question. You don't have to ask one, but this is a special opportunity to be able to ask a question. So just raise your hand and we'll bring the microphone to you.
So Dr. Lindsay, I didn't make the connection when I first met you. I had seen your video about a month ago. I recommend it to everybody. It was brilliant, the one that you went to the European Union, so highly recommended. There's this YouTube has been out for a long time by Barry Yezmanoff, I think it was, some ex-KGB agent that described the 4 phases, and we're kind of living it. And what are your thoughts on that? Is that a credible video, or is it just BS?
So I can't speak to the credibility of the video itself. I've watched Yuri Bezdomov speak about this. I find it to be compelling, whether it's authentic or not. It's fairly well recognized that there are these 4 stages of a revolution, a cultural revolution or a communist revolution. The first one of those is kind of an operational preparation of the environment. That's what is it called? Demoralization. And the goal of demoralization is multifaceted. It's to make people believe that you're going to lose, that it's inevitable, to remove your morale, but also to make it impossible for you to tell you true and false, real from fake, good and evil, so that you don't know up from down, left from right, yes or no. And when a population, he says, is demoralized, you can show them the facts and the facts mean nothing. Well, maybe the video is real, maybe the video is not real, but I think that's everybody's experience. If we talk to a woke person and we give them facts, they immediately say that that's a political interpretation of the facts and it's not real. They have no capacity to understand real or fake. Fake news is what we're all fed kind of constantly. So this demoralization has been taking place. Our education system, like she said very, very clearly and very importantly, we don't learn about the history of communism. We know nothing about it, so we don't see it when it's happening around us. Our society has been demoralized. With conservatives, especially, it's frequent in blue states, but I hear it more often actually in red states. You see this kind of doomer mentality. Oh, it's all over. It's already done. They already beat us. I don't know what that's supposed to achieve. I said on Twitter today that the Marxists call this a submerged mentality. You're submerged underwater. And if you have somebody underwater, they can't pull you out of the water, by the way. I don't know what they're supposed to be doing with their pessimism, but that's a state of having lost their hope, lost their faith, literally lost their faith in this country, in this future. So we're demoralized. The next stage is destabilization. That's where I think a phrase I heard to describe it is the piling on of horribles. I think that's where we are. Whether it's COVID, whether it's, the president hanging the pride flag or the progress flag, for F's sake, in the middle between American flags from the White House the other day. Pride Month seeming to just be this kind of gelatinous blob that spreads across first a day and then a week and then a month and now a season and next Pride all year. Why not? Pride year, every day, all the time. 365 Pride. This is this heaping on of horribles that breaks the spirit, but it ultimately is meant to destabilize a nation. The things you're doing with our money, the inflation, the currency, it's meant to destabilize a nation because, as we all kind of alluded to, the enemy of communism is stability. Whether it's economic stability, cultural stability, social stability, they must destabilize. The trans movement in the schools is to destabilize psychologically the children because they'll become revolutionaries. Psychologically stable people don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. And so then the next stage after that is crisis. And the crisis will be some emergency. Well, what is the World Economic Forum telling us is coming? What's Davos 2024? What's the theme? The polycrisis. It's not one crisis, it's all the crises, many crises, all at the same time. Of course, what we need in order to solve that is global cooperation, global coordination. Of course, they'll manage that for us. Thank you very much. No problem. They've got this. They're the experts. Shut up and listen to science. And then the last stage is renormalization, where we accept the new term. So I think that this, whether Yuri Bezmenov is a legitimate KGB defector or not, I think is actually an accurate depiction of how a communist revolution proceeds, what we are facing, what we are experiencing, and actually a timeline into where we are. So we can expect within the next however many, 12, 24, 36 months, crisis. We can expect them to leverage another crisis to try to claim power, and the destabilized population that's demoralized and can't understand the world around them is meant to simply accept it and be saved from the crisis by the government. And if we're ready for that, it derails it. This is why Xi's formula at the end of her talk seems like it doesn't work, but it does. Understand, expose. What was the third one? Resist. That's the key one, right? I can't remember it. I'm demoralized. And then get organized. If we resist the thing, do we have vaccine passports, ladies and gentlemen? No, because 50 million, which is a minority of Americans, resisted. And they couldn't do it that way. If we resist, we derail their program. So I think this is a legitimate framework to understand what's happening, and I think that we must think about that strategically and be able to get ahead of it so that when they try it, it fails. When they try it, we call them out. We laugh at them. We refuse. We say no. We ask the one question that no tyrant can answer. And I want you to think about this. I want you to write this down. This is the question you ask every time. Doesn't matter if it's a tyrant on the left, a tyrant on the right, a tyrant off in outer space. What will you do with the people who say no? Yeah. What will you do with the people who say no? And a tyrant will tell you every time, we'll make them. We'll force them. We'll kick them out of society. We'll shame them. And that's how you know what you're dealing with. If you get this in your head now and you start exposing and explaining why that's the case, you derail their program, and it doesn't have to, it's not an inevitability. You don't have to be a submerged, demoralized doomer that just accepts our unpleasant fate.
Hey, hello. My name is Sammy, and I work for Young Americans Foundation. And like one of the things that like I'm gonna say we do at the Young Americans Foundation is that we fight against professors and pretty much like woke college administrators. And I ran a how can I say, like a student club at my college, and like one of the big problems that I found is that a lot of people, they're like afraid, they're like that afraid of like joining our club. I would say, hey, do you want to come to our meeting? It is like it is like a private place. Nobody will know we were there, and they were still afraid because they thought if my professor sees me like walking into the class, he's gonna give me a 0. He's gonna, he's gonna like expel me, retaliate against me. And this is a fear that a lot of students have. So my question, especially to Xi, because you've been there, I want to know, how do we convince people who are on our side but are so afraid that they'll be silent to speak up? How do we do that?
Thank you.
Okay. Yeah. All I can say is that think about it. 15 years ago, not that long ago, if you say something kind of controversial or whatever, you might just be called a racist. And I don't think at that time you will lose your jobs. But we didn't. We just did not say anything. We just complied. And we complied. And today, If you say something and they don't like, you'll not only be called a racist, you're going to possibly lose your job and possibly lose your business. So that is how how it progressed. And I can guarantee you, because I was there and I saw it, if we still continue to comply, the next time, if you feel like you want to say something, jail. And continue, execution. That's always the process. So when I see people in China, they still resist. Not too long ago, there was a Chinese woman, just like last week. She went on, there was a May Day concert in Beijing. Do you know this? She went up a tower and then she held American flag and then spread and throw down the declaration, the copies of Declaration of Independence to the people down there. That is real courage. She's definitely going to be jailed. God knows what will happen to her. And that's the people still resist. And the Americans here, okay, so if I want to say, they say this, people send me all sorts of letters or email and a text message. Thank you for speaking for the silent majority, and that is the problem. If in the workplace, if one speak up, they become a target. If 2 and 3 and 4, Americans don't know what's down the road if we continue to be nice and comply. That's all I have to say. Sorry.
I would just add one quick thing, which is I spoke at a college which is a Christian evangelical private school, and they are in the process of becoming woke because of from top-down effort, faculty and administration. But the student body is still 50-50, and the faculty is fairly close to 50-50. And the students, the young Republicans invited me to speak, and they said, we censor ourselves. This is a low-risk environment. They're not even going to have those sorts of repercussions if they speak out. And I said, the left is not afraid to speak out. Why do we censor ourselves? I think we're demoralized, for one thing. I think that the branding of being uncool, of being on the side of hate, I think that's infected our psyche. But if we can't do it now when it's a very low-risk environment, then we're not going to be able to weather what is to come. So I think that conservatives have to change that mindset pretty quickly.
I would tell you that you should tell people, I tell people this specific thing lately, and I found it helps. I think it's very helpful to say it very plainly, which is the more it costs to do the right thing, the more important it is to do the right thing. Yeah. It's very simple. That's every archetypal hero story. The more it costs to do the right thing, the more important it is to do the right thing. And just like both have said, it gets worse. If you don't do it now, it's going to be worse. And so I would just encourage them to think about that. They say they don't want to come, they're scared or whatever. You're a landing pad, okay? Tell them, we're here, you're welcome, we're not going to try to force you, we're not going to shame you, but just remember, the more it costs you to do the right thing, the more important it is to do the right thing. And go think on that. And we're here when you're ready.
Noelle, I have a question for you. You mentioned the image of the shepherd, and I would add the image of Jesus culturally as this sort of European shampoo model, as a soft, passive individual, and how that sort of emasculates the church. To what role can the church play in combating this virus?
Yeah, that's a good question. The cultural revolutionaries target the shepherd because they want access to the sheep. And I think there's a real connection between the protection of innocence and the loss of authority, right? If you emasculate authority, then you're no longer going to have anything to protect innocence. And part of that is also a recognition that there is something called evil. And I think the church has been really negligent in that and eviscerated the substance of the faith in so many ways, and made it basically something that is kind of social justice with, the decorations of Christianity. And once you make it sort of emasculated, you make it really quickly irrelevant, and then you make it easy prey for being utterly gutted. So I think the church needs shepherds, right? I think our culture needs shepherds. We need good, strong men to remember that, you look at the landscape of society and we're told that there's too much masculinity. We have the opposite problem. We are in want of masculinity, not in excess of it. And I think that's true in the church as well. We need male leadership because once the church becomes something that is the purview of the feminine, it becomes something that is sentimental. It no longer becomes something that is a spirit, that it recognizes that there's a real spiritual battle to be had and that the stakes are high. And so I think to galvanize that sort of effort is utterly crucial. It's one of my most important missions, I feel like, and when I talk, is just to help Christians remember what the stakes are.
Can I jump on that too? Yeah,
No, you say first.
Okay, so I think that the church has the same landing pad message I just shared with the campus organization idea. I think this is actually important. There are a lot of people that are kids, young people especially, who are going woke because they're messed up inside. And I think a lot of people who pastor know this. And to give the message, instead of this kind of, let's go fight boldly, Deus Vult or whatever the thing is, to come out and say, look, you're hurting. Think of a PR campaign from the church, from churches. You're hurting. We know you're hurting. We have answers. We have healing. Come when you're ready. You're welcome anytime. That's it. That's the commercial. Put some music, get your shampoo model Jesus, whatever you have to do. Think of this message, though, and the idea that the church is going to be that place. You are welcome here. We know that you're confused and hurting, and if you have questions, no judgment, that's what confession's about, come talk. That's what pastorship is about. And I think that if you have that, combined with a church that has its base set, it's based real and stoic, as the kids would say, then you have a recipe for creating the bulwark and the cultural renewal that puts up the best fight possible, with the possible exception of the First Amendment, against this cultural Marxist incursion in the United States.
I just want to say, this is something I've been thinking. What is really the woke? How to define it? Of course, we have all sorts of ways to define it. And I really start to think, woke is cultural Marxism customized for a Christian culture. Mm-hmm. It would not work in non-Christian culture. Those kindness, love, those things would not work at all. In China, they will laugh at this kind of approach. Acceptance and empathy, this is all kind of Christian virtues. And then they turn around and use it against us. So I think that is something I realize that.
Yeah, everybody's mind is blown with that. Thank you, Shannon.
Yeah.
That's right. That's right.
So in that case, I think I truly believe, the only thing that can defeat wokeism is Christianity. They have to redefine the terms and use it as against them.
Thank you. All right, we have time for one more question from one of our sponsors. Here's the thing. We could have Q&A for 55 more hours, but we're limited on our time with this hotel. So if you want to do more of these types of events, tell your really wealthy conservatives to donate to Awake Americans. That's my shameless plug. Thank you to Dr. Jim Economist. He's one of our sponsors, so you get the privilege of the last question.
Thank you. Well, thanks everybody for coming. I have two comments and a question for Z. First of all, I have a home in Honduras. Pardon. And lately, they've been rationing the electricity. They've even announced that we're going to be cutting down the amount of electricity. So all of a sudden, you're sitting in your house, boop, out goes the lights. You don't know how long it's going to stay off for. So I've been having some group discussions with my neighbors there. Some of them do pretty well. They're been around for a while. I said, you guys, this is part of the problem. Like you talk about the World Economic Forum with Davos. They want to reduce your lifestyle by reducing your use of electricity. So these people are subject to this, and that's like you say, we got to talk to everybody. Secondly, sometimes we're too polite when we're talking about politics and things. And they talk about gender affirming care. I say, keep your kids out of the chop shop. I'm on talk radio all the time, especially in urban talk radio in Chicago. Keep your damn kids out of the chop shop. And this is the kind of language sometimes You got to be a little bit forceful, but you got to get the message, man. Take a big pair of shears, keep your kids out of chop shop, because these kids aren't going to be reproducing. A lot of the folks here are starting to realize that, all these black senators in Illinois, they're pushing all this gender stuff, but there's a guy named Jimmy Tillman, his mother was an alderman in Chicago. He says, you know what, we keep following this protocol, we're not going to be reproducing in 20, 30 years. So that's absolutely correct. Keep your kids out of the chop shop. And also, Z, I was wondering, one of the arguments they want to take away our guns here in Chicago, in Illinois, the United States. In China, a couple of years ago with the COVID lockdown, they were locking people in these high-rises, and there was one high-rise in particular where it caught on fire and people couldn't get out. Can you talk a little bit about what happened with that and what was the outcome of all that?
You mean the disarm the population?
Well, there was a high-rise that caught on fire. They were locked. They were welding the doors.
Yeah.
And I said, if some guy came to your building, you had a 22 in your pocket, you got to weld my door, boom, boom, drive the guy away. And this is what happens when you take guns away from the people.
Yeah.
So in China, with the whole COVID thing, they horribly did this. So could you talk about some of that?
Well, disarming the population, that was the first thing they did. Actually, there was, so they liberated the north. They called it liberated north first, and then they go down the south. So my mother joined the army, and she came down south. So where I grew up, I heard there is bandits. There was a bandits rebellion against the communists. And so up to this point, only like a month or two ago, I read some material, realized that was peasant rebellion. But they branded as bandits rebellion. That means people were armed. Before the communists took over, the people that were armed, and those peasants rose up with weapons against the high taxes by the communists. Of course, they were eventually all put down, and all the weapons were confiscated. But you can see that when people have armed, they can do something. They said they have two choices. One is to starve to death. One is to fight to death. They choose the latter. But since then, of course, they're just lambs on the chopping board. And in the COVID, not only that, the doors were locked from outside to prevent them from going outside. And so that's the fire that the people could not escape. Also, you can see all sorts of videos of people just followed. There's a whole town with 30,000 people went to the quarantine center with just a few, a few policemen. They all follow. Yeah. They're just like sheep. They have no choices. That's what happened when the citizens are disarmed.
I'll tell you a joke if you want. You can remember the joke because it's easy. Yeah. What does the government do after it disarms its people? Anything it wants.
We want this to carry out and to effectively be, for you to evangelize it. And so what we've done is we have built a toolkit that will have some resources, starter questions, links to, for example, James's podcasts, which are phenomenal, for you to share with your peers. Because we have to really normalize the conversation around these issues and to not be afraid, right? So this is going to be available after the recording is ready to go. It's going to have, like I said, all these really good suggestions, and we want you to, to be guided in having your own courageous conversations. So maybe you'll apply them at the soccer game, the Bible study, the poker game, wherever you are, share these resources and talk about it, and talk about how cool and punk rock and roll these people are, because they're really sounding the alarm, and it's pretty amazing to hear them and be inspired by them. So just engage people and see where the conversation goes. You're not there to necessarily preach. Think of it as like a listening mission. What is woke to you? Where are you seeing it? What do you love about America? Do you think our public education is woke? Do you talk to your kids about woke at the dinner table? So we're going to be sharing, this is just a preview, but we're going to be sharing this with all of you, so that you can awaken others into advocacy. And so what I think I'm going to just leave you with is that you guys are really the key to solving a lot of these issues, to solving the barrier that people have when they say, ooh, I mean, I agree with you. How many times have we heard it? I really agree with you guys, but like you have to be the ones to do it. I can't. Well, that's ship sailed. You all have to be doing something because we've been the punching bag, and gladly, but they can't come for all of us. You know, if you have the power in numbers, they can't come for all of us. They canceled James Lindsay. He was censored on Twitter for 3 months because he spoke truth, right? You were disinvited from a college campus because your views were deemed, quote, too dangerous for the snowflakes at a college institution. So, you know, we've all had attempts to cancel us, Machiavellian attempts of cruelty. A guy drove down my street and yelled that I'm a Nazi. Thank you, Naperville Police Department, and also thank you for having them circle around the hotel today, right? I mean, they know that these people are lunatics. Why? Because woke is what? It's a religion. Woke is what? It's a predator. Woke is what? State government control run amok. But what they should all really have inspired us tonight, and I felt it, was that it's hopeful. Woke is surmountable if you all normalize these courageous conversations. You have to make the side of good cool. You have to make it normal and accessible to people. So they can't come for all of us. It's not going to happen. We're not going to allow it. So that whole preface with the Declaration of Independence, really what I want you to think about is how will you declare your independence, your family's independence, your children's independence from woke. So if you have to sign your name, where will you sign it? It won't be John Hancock's beautiful signature, but how will you be bold? How will you do it beautifully and with courage? You have to sign your name, and you have to declare independence now. Thank you again to our speakers. Once more for our speakers, please. Yes, Noelle, James, and She, thank you. Thank you to our sponsors. And thanks to all of you. So go forth to awaken others into advocacy. And until we see you again, God bless you and God bless America. Thank you.